Hi, this is SpookyRecapped, and today I'm going to recap the movie The Hole in the Ground. We are introduced to the protagonist, Sarah, and her son, Chris. Sarah has escaped an abusive relationship with her ex and has taken Chris with her. They have just moved to a new city and are on their way to their new home. When they are driving, someone appears in the middle of the road, almost making Sarah crash the car. A strange hooded woman is standing in the road, mumbling to herself. When Sarah tries approaching the woman, she turns her head and looks at Chris, who is still in the car. Sarah gets back inside of her car and they drive off to their new home. At the house, Chris is playing with his favorite action figure and doesn't like the food that Sarah has made for him. To cheer him up, Sarah plays a game where they make silly faces to each other. She kisses Chris and goes down to the basement. Sarah hears Chris scream upstairs. He has found a spider, which he is very afraid of. They set the spider free outside, and Chris runs into the forest. Sarah follows him, but cannot find him anywhere. She suddenly stops when she sees a giant hole in the middle of the forest. Luckily, she sees Chris and hugs him. At night, she tucks Chris in. The next day, Sarah picks up Chris from his first day at school. She finds a pamphlet of a talent show at school and tells Chris that he should join. Later, Sarah is having dinner with her new friends. They start talking about the strange woman Sarah has seen. Her name is Noreen. She had a mental breakdown a while ago, and apparently she thought her own son was an imposter. Noreen's son were killed by her husband's car in an accident. At night, Sarah wakes up to a loud sound. She walks down the stairs and sees that the front door has been opened. Sarah walks outside to look for Chris. When she can't find him in the forest, she runs back to the house and calls the police. Luckily, Chris appears inside of the house and tells Sarah that he has been there all along. The next day, Sarah goes to the doctor and is asked to show the scar on her forehead. The doctor gives her some medication for anxiety, and Sarah goes home to rest. The next day, she wakes up to Chris, who has picked flowers for her. She thanks him and drops him off at school. Later, when they are driving home, Sarah sees Noreen in the middle of the road and stops the car. When trying to speak with her, she tells Sarah that Chris is not her son. Noreen's husband, Des, comes over and introduces himself. When Sarah is about to leave, Noreen bangs her head on the window and Sarah quickly drives away. She later drives over to speak with Des, but finds Noreen dead. Her head has been buried in the dirt. Police interrogate Sarah while she's looking at Chris, who is arm wrestling an officer. He snaps his arm, but this was all in her head. Sarah then goes to see her friend at work and asks her if she have ever felt like she can't recognize her own child. She tells Sarah that this is normal and Chris is just growing up. She then goes to Noreen's funeral and starts talking to Des. Des tells Sarah about Noreen and her mental struggles. Noreen was convinced that their son James were an imposter. When she was released from psychiatric care, James was accidentally killed by Des's car when he were backing up. Later, when Sarah is running in the forest, she finds Chris's favorite action figure lying on the ground. At dinner, Chris is suddenly devouring his meal when Sarah confronts him about his toy. Chris gets angry and is able to push the table against Sarah, scaring her. Later that night, Sarah goes to check on Chris. She looks under his door and sees a spider crawling on the ground. Chris grabs it, and when she's looking through the keyhole, Chris is eating the spider alive. Unfortunately, he hears Sarah in the hallway, and she runs into her bedroom. Chris comes out to say goodnight, and then leaves again. Worried about Chris, she takes him to a doctor, but nothing is wrong with him. She then goes to her friend's store and borrows a camera. While Chris is watching television, Sarah sneaks upstairs and hides the camera behind some bricks. When hanging up laundry, Chris is staring at her through the window. Sarah is in the kitchen with Chris when he starts touching the scar. He pushes his fingers inside of her head, and Sarah wakes up as it was just a nightmare. She sees Chris combing his hair and practicing for the talent show. At the talent show, Sarah gets freaked out, so she runs out. She tells her friend that Chris is not her son and runs away again. Later, when checking the camera, she gets freaked out about what she sees. She then drives over to Des to tell him about Chris. She shows him the photograph, but Des throws the camera to the ground and asks her to leave. Sarah grabs the broken camera and goes back home. She asks Chris if he's hungry, and he says yes. When cooking his food, she slips in all of her medication, planning to sedate Chris. She gets even more suspicious when he eats all the powdered cheese, which he usually hates. When Chris doesn't respond to their usual game, she tells him that he is not her son. Chris gets angry and throws Sarah around the kitchen. Sarah wakes up outside as Chris is burying her head in the ground. Luckily, the pills are kicking in and Chris passes out. Sarah is able to free her head before suffocating. She drags Chris inside and brings him down to the basement. She then grabs a mirror and points it to Chris. A monster is in the reflection, scaring Sarah. The lights go out and it attacks her. She throws the monster to the ground, runs up the stairs, and locks the door while the creature is screaming. Sarah then goes out in the forest, finds the pit, and slowly descends. When she is down there, she finds a small cave and starts crawling through. On the other side, she finds human skulls and sees Chris laying in the dirt. When trying to dig him free, more creatures wake up. She quickly grabs Chris and starts crawling back as the creatures follow her. One of them grabs her arm and is transformed into herself. She hits the creature and gets out of the pit with Chris. Luckily, Chris is still alive, and she embraces her son. When coming back, she puts him against her car and goes inside of the house to grab the keys. Upon leaving the house, she sets it on fire, killing the creature in the basement. They drive off, and Sarah starts going back to school. They have moved into a new apartment, and Sarah takes photographs of Chris to make sure that it is not one of the creatures. We see the entire apartment is covered in mirrors as the movie ends. Thank you so much for watching this video. Subscribe for more content like this. And stay spooked, people.